What is that? Hello and welcome to my channel Inch by Inch Art. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made a mini for a custom tabletop RPG game based on D&D. I'm using super sculpey on a cardboard base that I cut for a huge creature, so it's 3 inches by 3 inches square. I'm just using my fingers to condition the clay, and then using the side of my sculpting tool to flatten it out into the shape that I want. The tools that I use are silicone-tipped sculpting tools on one end and ball stylus on the other. My inspiration for this particular mini is the Moldarach from Legend of Zelda SKYWARD SWORD. My group is going to be adventuring into a desert shortly, and the DM said that we're going to be dealing with some scorpion monsters and told me to make some minis that were interesting, different monster creatures that you wouldn't normally see since it is quite homebrewed, and a lot of us are Legend of Zelda fans, so I thought this would be a fun treat for everybody. Just using the sculpting tool to press in the eye and make sure all of my pieces are firmly pressed together. Everything is still unbaked at this point, so I can easily press the clay together with just my sculpting tools or my fingers. For the legs, I decided that I would have a bit of an armature. I've found that this generally is a much easier way to keep pieces that are used for minis and get touched more often stable, and make sure that the pieces have legs and parts properly oriented. Now that I've got my legs in place where I want them, I'm going to use some liquid sculpey to essentially glue them into place, and also coating the wire so that it's going to be easier to put super sculpey on top. Once I've got it baked, I can start testing out how the tail will fit and coating the legs with super sculpey to flesh them out. I use the armature wire for the 2 front claws, all 6 legs, and the tail. I essentially just rolled pieces of clay and put them on the wire for the tail like beads, so it's like a string of beads because the Moldarach's tail is very segmented. And then I just put a big ball in the end and added little worms to make spikes. I was trying out the method of using the dried liquid sculpey on the wire armature for the first time. Usually I just try to put it right onto the wire. I find that typically the wire is very slick and frustrating. To try and put fresh sculpey on, it tends to slip around quite a bit. I did try this out to see if it would work. It seemed to help a little bit, but it did also actually unsecure from the wire as well, which was frustrating in and of itself. So now that I've got my tail sculpted and put in place temporarily just for fitting, and all of my legs sculpted, I can move on to the front claws. I'm following a similar process as I did with the tail, and I'm essentially making the segments and sort of putting them on the wire like they were beads. I'm stringing them on one at a time. And I do use liquid sculpey on all parts to make sure that they're not only adhered well to the body, but to each other, particularly since I've already baked it once at this point. Now moving on to making the claws. The claws are the most interesting, well, one of the most interesting parts about the Moldarach. They're very mouth-like and monster-like and have these weird muscle eyeball things in the center. As with everything in Legend of Zelda, it's gotta have lots of eyes for shooting at. I don't know if our DM will make these weak points or not. I just decided that I was going to make this exact creature in miniature form and they can do whatever they want with it. Just using my sculpting tools to press in some details. These claws have odd areas that sort of look like teeth in the imagery from the game. I feel like sometimes the games aren't showing things as detailed as they would have liked to, and I don't have a book of any sort of official art from SKYWARD SWORD to reference, so I took a bit of artistic liberty with this and decided that the parts that were spikes, or again, they sort of looked like teeth to me. There's these parts of the claw that stick up that I decided to make very tooth-like, and they're mostly tooth-like in the actual image of it. And now I'm using the liquid sculpey on the back, because again, this has been baked once before, and I've removed the tail to make it easier for me to do this part. I'm just going to add detail on the back because they have a lot of armor plating in both spikes and this sort of zigzagging plate pattern. So I'm just making some little worms, putting them on where I need them, and then I use the sculpting tool to press them and move them and mold them around on the back to get them to look how I want. Now I need to add the face plates. The Moldarach has a lot of protection around its little center eye, and it also has 2 fangs. So I just sculpted each piece and pressed it in onto the liquid sculpey so that it would stick. I was glad that I did this part before I did the second claw, just because it was getting a little fiddly to try and reach in here. And I did have to move these strips around quite a bit to place them where I wanted to. I kept having a reference image in front of me to compare how I was doing, but there's more than one Moldarach, and there's quite a bit of art of the Moldarach, so again, it's more of my interpretation and a mini of a Moldarach, so it doesn't have to be exact. It's just gotta be close enough that my friends will know what it is, and it's a creepy mini. I have mixed some liquid sculpey here together with some super sculpey, and the idea was that I didn't have to put liquid sculpey all over the whole thing. If you put it on, it will leave a texture that you might not want. So by mixing the liquid sculpey and super sculpey together, I've made sort of a paste that's very sticky. So I use that to put on these last little details of spots on the body and raised spikes and stuff. Now for the last bake. And onto painting. Moldarach is some pretty fun colors, and I really liked it. The bright orange belly and the orange stripes that were around it and yellow markings and spots. All of the paint I'm using is the same acrylic paint that I normally use in my videos. It's just a cheap dollar store paint that I water down a little bit to get it to the consistency that I want. I also hand mix all of the colors, but they are all from the same kit. Now for the details, I've decided to just boost up the look of the spikes and everything with a gray wash. The Moldarach imagery seemed like it was possibly a little bit of a brownish, or it had other colors mixed in, and I really wanted it to have that black and gray monotone and then the really striking eye color and belly color. So I just stuck with black all over the body and then a light gray wash. Here you can really see how those teeth look. I think they came out pretty cool. Well, the teeth and the claws is what I'm talking about. And I'm just coloring the eyes in. Dotting tools and silicone sculpting tools are really good for painting. It might seem a little bit odd, but I find that with paintbrushes, you have to keep track of every single little hair. And with a sculpting tool or a dotting tool, you don't have to worry about that. It goes exactly wherever the solid tool is. Getting all my pupils on. And now for an experiment. So I use quite a bit of resin, and I had this cool mica powder that I accidentally realized was UV reactive, and it glowed really cool under a UV light. And I always have a UV light, so I figure I will show the players this in game and it'll be like a cool reveal. So I mixed the mica powder with the UV resin really, really well and made a orange resin coat that I then put all over the orange and yellow on the belly. And so that it wouldn't slop everywhere, I used the UV flashlight pretty quickly as I was applying it. I also do blue for the eyes that I did not film making. Here I've moved on to the base. This technique's worked really well for me. Using glue and water wash on cardboard or fiberboard makes it extra strong. Put a little bit of thin toilet paper on it and glue it down and let it dry. It makes it quite stiff and gives it a little bit of texture. Now I'm just mixing some blue glitter and blue mica powder that is also the same brand, so it's UV reactive mica powder, to some just regular play sand. And adding blue paint to the base while it's still coated with glue, so everything will also stick. The reason I'm doing this is nothing to do with The Legend of Zelda. It's actually just specifically has to do with the homebrew game. We're going to be going to what's called the Sapphire Desert in the game, so I thought it would be good if the little base had some sapphire colored sand. And now I'm just gluing the mini down. So I use baking soda as an accelerant for super glue, and I only put it underneath the feet because I didn't want it on the feet, because the baking soda with the glue will actually create a hard mass and it can change the texture and add mass onto whatever it's touching. So by putting the baking soda underneath, I don't have to worry about that. And here's my Legolas that I painted in my short, challenging the Moldarach.